Hopefully everybody can hear me. Okay, Jess? Great, perfect. So thank you everybody for attending my little chess lecture. I'm trying to keep this this talk on chess actually in context for the day, because obviously being a day about technology talks. So this is not just a random collection of chess information. This is about specifically chess engines and how sometimes they're really, really good and sometimes they're actually quite poor. Where they're quite poor is in long-term planning rather than the short-term technical analysis where they're really strong. So we're going to have a look at that. Now, just to put this into context about how strong modern chess computers are, they are very, very strong. This is, let's come back. What you see on screen is the current ELO ratings for various chess engines. So Stockfish is the current leader on 3,600 points. Houdini, Komodo, they're all really, really strong chess engines, all roughly the same. Stockfish 9 is actually open source software. You can just download it, install it, and run it on any free chess client. To put that into context, the current world champion, anybody know his name? Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen has been the world chess champion for a good number of years now. He's considered to be, one of the greats of all time. Anybody that's a world chess champion is. And Magnus Carlsen, his rating, 2850. So these chess engines would you expect to beat Magnus Carlsen 99 times out of 100. So these chess engines are really, really strong. Actually, as a side note, has anybody heard of AlphaZero? It was in the news about 6 months ago how it would learn Go, became the world Go champion. He's learning chess recently, and Google running a test. They taught AlphaZero to play chess, auto-learning, starting from zero knowledge, and within the space of a couple of days of constant games, it was beating Stockfish 9. So it's even stronger. So I don't know for certain if what I'm going to tell you today also applies to AlphaZero. It probably does, but regardless, they all follow roughly the same kind of pattern. So what are we looking at? There's a chessboard. Great. That was my introduction. So let's have a look at this position. Let me move that onto the screen. So this is how a typical chess engine would calculate here. It would go a typical scoring in chess. It can be taken down to a basic level of points. So a pawn is worth 1 point. So if we count up the points here, we see black has got 1, 2, 3, 4 points. White has got 1, 2, 3. And a bishop is considered to be worth 3 points. 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 versus 4, so white's winning by +2. Okay, let's bring up the chess engine. And actually you see here the actual valuation is given about plus 1.75. The plus minus means it's white against black. So white is the plus, black is the minus. Plus 1.75. Okay? Kind of makes sense? Let's just remove that chess engine from there. And let's remove all of these little things. Control Y. There we go. Remember the keyboard shortcuts. Okay. So why is the chess engine wrong here? Or does anybody think that the chess engine is wrong? I just told you the answer. The chess engine is wrong. This game is a dead draw. Can anybody see why that's a draw? Okay, so what we have to do, okay, there's one person in the room. Chris, why is that a draw?
Oh, because it is. Yeah, swap off the bishop for a pawn and then it's going to start the move.
Okay, so let's analyze it in a little bit more detail. Okay, so to win this game, white has got to checkmate the king. Obviously, that's the ultimate game. Now, white can't do that only with the bishop. It's impossible. To checkmate a king on an open board, you need 2 bishops and a king, or a bishop and a knight and a king, if you can work out the sequence of moves. That's the minimum. So to win this game, white has got to promote one of his pawns. So far, so good? But each of these pawns is currently blocked by the black pawns. So these pawns cannot move. So to win this game, white has got to find a way to capture one of the black pawns. So I don't know, say that black pawn there, and then march his pawn all the way to the end. Simple so far? How's he going to do that? How can the king penetrate into that position? The king cannot go onto that square because it's covered by that pawn. It cannot go onto that square because it's covered by that pawn. It cannot go onto that square, nor that square, nor that square. So the king has actually got no way into that position. So there's no way that king can capture any of the black pawns. So what about the bishop? Well, the bishop has obviously got free reign. It can go into the position there with a check, and then maybe in the future it can capture that pawn. Okay? But if it captures that pawn, well, to defend that position, the black king has just got to stay on one of those two squares. Because if the bishop captures that pawn, if the bishop ever catches that pawn, then the black king can just capture it. Okay, so that's not winning. And what about this other white pawn, the only other pawn which can be attacked by that bishop? Well, obviously, if it captures that pawn, then the supporting pawn will just recapture the bishop, and we're in a deadlock position. So in summary, there's absolutely no way that that king can get into that position along this line here. And the bishop can do no damage whatsoever. Therefore, it's a 100% drawn position. Grandmasters know this. Humans will know this. But what does our chess engine say? Even now, we've given it how long? 5 minutes to run. It's still saying plus 1.5. The chess engine is actually wrong in the assessment here. It should be saying equal 0.00 because it's a dead draw. The chess engine is wrong. Should we go on to another example? Let's have a look at this one, a little bit more complex. Okay. Well, what would your assessment of this position be? Well, counting up the points, I mean, each side has got one pawn each. Black has got a rook, it's worth 5 points, and white has got a queen worth 9 points. So in theory, white's winning by 9 points to 5, plus 4 points it should be. What does our chess engine say? And the chess engine I'm using, as you can see, is Houdini, one of the strongest chess engines, running on my little laptop, which is not one of the strongest computers in the world, but it's still better than me. So it's given a rating of +3. White has a decisive advantage. And to put this into context, a +1 in a professional level game is enough to win, especially in an endgame. If you reach an endgame, a pawn up, that's game over. And a grandmaster would just resign long before that point, actually. So here, what we're saying is, black should resign because what's the point in playing on? You've lost. But actually, this position is again 100% drawn. And why is that? Well, to win this game, white has got to capture the black rook. Make sense? Or to find a way to checkmate the king. Okay. Well, let's say white tries to checkmate the king. Well, in short, it can't do that. You can't check a king to death. That doesn't work. To checkmate the king with the queen, you need the support of the king. So the king has got to find a way to march up the board to lend support to the queen. Make sense so far? Okay, let's go back to the start. That's our starting position. But the white king can't march up the board. Why? Because of that rook is covering all of those squares. So there's no way that white queen can enter the black position. And actually, black doesn't need to do anything here. He can, all day long, he can just go, well, say, for instance, white goes king e5, black can just move the rook. Simples. Queen check. just continually check like that. Even if the king comes to that square, nothing happens. The only other way to do it would be for white maybe to capture the rook while it's on that square. But actually, if you know anything about the endgames, you know even that doesn't work, because black can always make sure that he's going to be captured with the rook on this square. The king can always come up to cover the rook. Or if eventually the white queen were to take the pawn on the h-file, generally what would happen in this position is the black king would come onto this square here and would just trap the white king on the edge of the board. So actually, this position is 100% drawn. Again, strong players, grandmasters would know this. But our chess engine, let's bring it up again, says plus 3.2. White is clearly winning, black should resign. No, the chess engine has got it wrong. These very, very strong chess engines, better than any grandmasters, cannot understand this basic concept. And why is that? And the reason is that they're working on short-term tactical analysis. They're thinking, well, if I move my, go back to the start. If I move my king there, then the black rook might move, and then I move my queen there, then I can check. And it does this for a whole series of moves. And bearing in mind as well that in chess, the FIDE laws of chess, if there's no pawn move or piece capture within 50 moves, the game is drawn anyway. So white in this position needs to force a checkmate, force a pawn move within 50 moves, otherwise it's a draw anyway. So you can see it's completely drawn. Everybody get that? Any questions? So far so good. So why is the computer wrong? There's a mute button on the middle, the orange.
How is that button?
Oh, there we go. If it's a draw within 50 moves, if you haven't forced the pawn to move in 50 moves, doesn't the computer just sort of, it does its short-term calculations, gets to 50 moves, and the black hasn't been captured or its pawn moved, but therefore the computer concludes that it's a draw?
That's a really good point.
Why does that not happen?
In this position, if you give the computer long enough, it will actually calculate that. And in fact, if you put these positions onto cloud engines, where these positions have already been calculated and cached, you will see that actually these show up as 0, 0. In fact, let's just quickly do that now. Let's bring up a... There we go. You see that... Exactly, and the point is there are, I wouldn't want to calculate, there are probably tens of millions of different move sequences you can make, up to 50. I mean, for instance, you've got the queen can move to the other side of the board, it can move into, multiply, well, we saw the number of combinations you can have by flicking a coin, which is a 50-50. Multiply that by to the power of 50. Now, see all the different combinations of chess moves you've got on that particular board, and it's, well, it's almost endless. But what you see here at the bottom of that I'm pointing to is this is cloud engines who have seen this position before, and they correctly assess it as a dead draw, 0.00.
Is that depth at the top of the screen how many moves?
That's how many moves it's actually calculated there. Yeah.
If you just went a bit further, but obviously the further along it goes, the more permutations there are.
Yes, exactly.
So,
yeah. And obviously give it enough time. And it will eventually calculate it. Even my little computer would. Okay, so far so good? Right, should we go on to another one? Because I know you're all enjoying this. Right, let's skip that one. Just give me 2 seconds while my computer thinks about it. Oh, crashed. I'm back again. Let's close that one. Okay, well, let's have a look at this one, and let's flip the board on here. More complex position, and let's just manually analyze what's happening here. Okay, first off, when you're assessing a position, best to start with pawn structures. We see that most of these pawns here are locked. So all these pawns I'm highlighting can't move. And you can see actually what else is happening on that board. Black can close the position there with that pawn advance, protected by the bishop. That bishop is actually doing nothing. It's going to be trapped there forever. It's got nothing on the white side which it could attack. I mean, potentially that pawn somehow, but that's not going to give up your bishop for the pawn. So that doesn't work. So black is actually doing nothing here. It's got no way to win this game. What about white? Okay, the same, all these pawns are pretty much locked, or if they're not locked now, they soon will be. That pawn there definitely can't advance because he's got the black pawn in a way on the A file, sorry. But it's black to move. If it were white to move now, his move would 100% be that. He'd move pawn to b6. And why would he do that? Because that forces the position to open up. The queen would come into there, onto this square. We would swap queens probably. The knight comes in, and then the knight can just bounce around here and probably gobble up some of these pawns. And that would be 100% won for white, unless black plays exceedingly well. Well, in fact, it's 100% won for white, unless white plays badly. Okay, so how can black to move, hold this position? Anybody have any guess? You've got to find a way right now to stop that pawn advancing. Can you do it by, say, protecting it with the king, so when that does move? No, not really, because, well, let's just have a look at that. Let's just say you moved your king there, pawn advances, swap. Would you do it right now? Well, perhaps you wouldn't do it right away. Perhaps you might move your king up first. But that actually, black in this particular, this is a real game. Black sets a little trap here. The little trap is this. Can you believe that? I'm going to give up my queen for the knight. And not resisting the temptation, white plays, knight takes, check, pawn takes. And now you can see all these pawns here are locked. Every single one on that side. And that pawn, the white pawn, can't do any damage. Locked. However, white does have an opportunity here, because white's got the queen. Can the queen get into the game? Well, the queen wants to get in the game by maybe coming across here, getting onto that square, gets into that square, comes around here, and then he's going to win easily. Of course, he can't get into the game at the moment because he needs this pawn to advance to get out of the way for the queen. Agreed? That's what he wants to do. So where were we? We were on to knight takes space. So he now plays h4. He advances the pawn. Yeah, to make space. So what does black play now to lock down the position? He can play G take H. Okay, but the white queen can still enter that position by that square. That square still open. Now, absolutely brilliant move here after queen tries to get into the game, say H3. And the whole point of this move is that if white now doesn't take that pawn will just advance onto that square. And again, that position will be locked because there'll be no way the queen can enter the game. In actual fact, that pawn will just be one square away from queening, which means that the white queen is always going to have to cover that back rank. So that game is going to be completely drawn if that happens. So white can't let that happen, so he has to take the pawn. And now, how to lock down the position? There you go. And that game is now completely drawn. All the pawns are locked. There's no way for the white queen to get into that position. What does the computer say? Computer says plus 7.8, winning by almost a whole queen. The computer is just 100% wrong. How could that be possible? And you can see what it's saying. He's saying things like, okay, king b2, king d8, queen d2, king e7, king b3. He's just moving the pieces around endlessly. Nothing's going to happen. and eventually after 50 moves it will just calculate all the different combinations of 50 moves it can make, and it will eventually realise, yes, this is a draw. Isn't that shocking? And in fact, if you go right back to the start, bring up the computer again, so this is the start position, actual fact it says is even more. Let's see what, because it's saying, because it's the computer's recommending knight take b6. Computer's wrong here. Actually, what is the long-term plan for white? To win this position, it is winnable from here. Black set the trap, knowing that white couldn't refuse taking the queen. So the winning plan for white here would be to attack the only weakness in the black position. And the only weakness is this pawn on a5, which is not protected by any other pawn. It's not protected by any other pawn, okay? So how can he attack that? We can do something like move the queen over to here so that it's attacking, then maneuver the knight round onto, say, that square where it's attacking, march the king up to here. Make sense? Should we see that in action? So, where's my mouse gone? Mouse is stuck. So let's start off with that, queen to d2. Black's got absolutely nothing to do here, so he just waits. King to a2, queen to b6, black's just waiting. Black can do absolutely nothing. It's exactly the same trap here, but white's not falling into it to this time. This is the way to win the position. Okay, so the king's now in position. Now let's maneuver the knight. How does the knight get onto? He wants to get onto this square here, where he can attack that pawn. Okay, so work backwards. Want to be on that square. How do I get there from that square? How do I get there from that square? So let's make that maneuver now with the knight. There we go. First move. Oh, black's decided now to lock down the position on the other side, just in case. Now, white's got 3 pieces, all attacking that one pawn. Black can only defend it with the queen. Knight takes. King moves out the way now. And actually, there's nothing black can do to stop these pawns marching on. Now, let's have a look at the assessment. Yeah, white's now saying correctly, look, plus 19, plus 20. It goes up to plus 80 when it calculates it. Checkmate. Simples. But white made the decisive error when it played in that position. In that position, it played knight take b6. It was a little trap that black set, and white fell straight into it, drawn position. But the computer, if you were playing a computer in that position, it would make exactly that move, and it would be exactly wrong, because that leads to a dead drawn position. There's nothing white can do from that point on to force checkmate. Sound good? Should we have a look at another one? Because I know you're all enjoying it even more now. And let's have a look at, this is probably my favourite actually. And let's flip it to make it a little bit easier to visualise. So let's assess this position. It's black to move. Black has obviously these pawns. Oops, wrong button. Black has these pawns. Obviously, white's got more pawns, so white's probably winning on material score. Let's have a quick count up, shall we? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 5 for the rook is 9. And for white, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for white. 9 versus, so white's winning plus 1 here. However, black does have this significant threat in a minute. The rook's going to come into there. The bishop has to move out the way somewhere. So the black rook is going to capture that pawn. So let's just see what the computer assessment is of this position. And it's giving black a 1.5 point lead here because it knows it can play that sequence of moves. So let's see how that would pan out. So let's go rook to h2. Rook to h2, and now let's say that white actually falls into the trap. There's a good sequence of moves that white can play here, which I'm going to explain, but let's just see what happens if you don't play the right sequence of moves. Okay, bishop's attacked, bishop moves out the way, rook takes the pawn. Okay, where does the bishop go now? It's got to go somewhere. Let's just say it goes there, and now, well, 99 times out of 100, a grandmaster will win this game because that pawn is weak. It'll gobble up that pawn. Some of these, it's essentially this is game over. So by playing that move, white has actually essentially thrown the game. So what do you play in this move to reach a drawn position? And there's a very, very, very clever sequence of moves. It's quite complex, actually, if you haven't seen it before. Double exclamation mark here, King E1. And what's the whole point of this? King E1, so you're giving up your bishop, but essentially you're saying that if I don't do that, and then the game's over anyway. Let's see how it plans out. So, okay, black takes the bishop. King attacks the knight. Now what black doesn't want to do here is to take that pawn with the rook, because the black king will capture, and this pawn will just march all the way down. Or the black king will be forced to defend it on one of these squares, say, and while it's defending, the white king will just march over here into this position and just gobble up these pawns, and one of his pawns will queen. Simples, okay? So black cannot allow that to happen. So black has to, even though he's got one move to save his rook, has to move his rook out the way. If he takes that pawn, it's defended by that. The white's playing down the board here in this position. Okay, so only one move to save the rook. Rook has to move out the way. And now the white queen chases the rook completely out of the way. Where does the black rook go? Well, just anywhere really. Anywhere. It has to be on that rank though. So, what to do in this position? Why is this position drawn for white? Here's the critical move. F3. Pawn to F3. And why is that the critical move? Because just look at the squares that these pawns control. All of these squares, undo, cancel. All of these squares present a blockade for the black king. The black king cannot advance to those squares. The black king also, well, he could get up there, well, in fact he can't move into these squares because those are covered by the pawn, so the black king has got no way into that position. Everybody see that? Good. Okay, so but what can the black rook do? Okay, he can harass the king. What the black rook ideally wants to do is to find a way, say, into the position up here by going like that, coming around the back here, gobbling up all these lovely pawns. Oh, beautiful. That's what he really wants to do. Let's see if he wants to do that. So he moves his king out the way. King moves up to stop the rook from coming into these two squares. Yes? Rook moves across. Now what's the one way to stop the rook from advancing into that position? King to there. Beautiful. So the rook's got no other option. Okay, let's go back to the other side. What does white do? King back again. The black rook has got no way into that position. So he tries, let's move the A pawn. Okay, what do you do here now? You can see what black's trying to cause problems on the A and B file. What do you do in this position? Really, if you do something like B4, that would be a complete mistake. And why is that a mistake? Because after take, it just opens up the position and there's nothing to stop the black rook coming in and gobbling up those pawns. Okay, that's totally one for black. So what other option do you have there? What about D3? Actually, this is another bad mistake, because you need to prevent the black rook from entering these squares here. And let's just see how that pans out. So say you go rook there, king there. Now black plays a waiting move to move the king. Now don't forget the white king has got to stay on to covering these two squares to prevent the black rook from coming in. He has to move out the way now. And now the rook can come into e3. Previously it couldn't because the white pawn was on that square and it was covering e3. You see that? Isn't that clever? So what do you do? So black's just played h4, a5. Wander the king around. Just stop the king. Exactly. You just lock down the position, and in this position, black can do absolutely nothing. How clever is that? So, what does our computer say about this position? It says +3 to black. In fact, it's even calculating a checkmate there somehow. F4. No, that's if wrong move. Okay, so again, the computer just got it completely wrong. How is that possible? We can see why it's possible when we look at the next example, and you're actually going to love this. You will love this. This is a little puzzle, actually. Anybody like knights? I hate knights. They're pesky little things. They get all over the place. So it's white to move. What's the score in this position? Well, black is just going to march his pawn up the board, and it's going to queen, and that's going to be... Is that going to be game over? Let's just say it's going to be... Well, a queen against two knights should be game over. But don't forget, a queen can only checkmate a white king with the use of the king. So it's the king and queen in combination. So essentially what black wants to do is advance this pawn up there, get a queen, and then march his king over here to support the queen, and they'll avoiding any nasty knight forks, and eventually you'll checkmate the king, and that will be completely won. Okay, but this is a really, really tricky position here. So white to move. I mean, what can white stop that pawn from queening? Well, let's say he goes knight there, pawn advances, knight there. Well, it's a queen, and that's no good. So that plan does not work. What about this? Okay, so the move here actually is h6. And why is that? Because black doesn't want to do this now, because he gets a queen, and white gets a queen, and that's probably one for white in this position. Okay, so here black has to capture. Now the critical move is knight to d6. Black goes, okay, I don't care about that, I'm just going to advance my pawn. I'm one move away from winning this game. And then white goes, I'm going to check you. In fact, even now, if white's not careful, this game is still one for black. But there's a very nice sequence of moves here, and you wouldn't believe it when you eventually work out how this wins the game for white, or draws it for white. You'll see it's absolutely amazing. So what's the point? Let's have a look at the possible moves. That black's in check, so he has to move the king somewhere. Where does he move his king to? Let's have a look at the first square. Say he goes to g5. What happens? Knight goes to d4. Get a queen, but that's allowed this fork here, winning the queen. Take the queen, and that's a drawn position. Two knights cannot checkmate a black king, a king. It just doesn't work. You need a bishop and a knight, not two knights. It doesn't work. So g5 doesn't work for black. What's the next move? King to h5. And what happens now? Plays knight to g3. Black king comes in, but now the knight actually protects the queening square. And despite how hard he tries, the king cannot chase that knight away. Say, for instance, he goes there, where you just go knight check, in fact, it doesn't even matter. Even if he worked out a way to, say he moved the other knight, even if he found a way to get a queen, you just take it off and that's a drawn position again. Okay, so black must find a way to chase the knight away. So we see that moving to h5 doesn't work. So what about g6? Well, in fact, that just draws immediately because you've got that knight fork check there, winning the pawn, drawn game. So far, so good. Getting there. So actually, the black king's only got one square to move to. Why has he only got one square? Because that knight is obviously checking on those squares. And we just said that the king can't move to those ones, so there's only one square left to go to, and that's that one. Okay, so we move all those. King to h7. Wow, okay. So why is this position now drawn? There's this lovely move here. Knight to e7. Why is that important? We'll just have a very, very quick check of what these knights are doing. These knights, firstly, are protecting each other. If black ever were to get a queen and to take one of the knights, then the other knight would just take it back, drawn game. So far, so good? That's exactly the point. The king's only got two squares, so these knights are covering that square, that square, that square. And this knight here on e7 is covering that square and that square. So the king has actually only got two squares he can move to. So what happens now? You get a queen. I go king to b4. Don't forget to checkmate the king. Black has got to find a way to get his king into the game. But his king has only got these two squares to move to. The king is trapped. And black will just try and check the white king, and it will achieve nothing. That's a completely drawn game. What does our computer say about this? Ooh, F2. Actually, the computer's now calculated this position correctly. Okay, so if you were saying, white moves there. If you take that, the knight takes back. And it's a draw. And obviously the computer can see that. If we go back right to the original position, I think the computer actually calculates this one correctly. Yeah, I think it does actually. So the computer's doing a little bit better on this one. But isn't that so interesting that you can find these almost seemingly losing position, but by understanding how you can... If you go right back to the very, very start, yes, it was there. Yeah, but it's still showing black winning here by a pawn, which should be enough. In actual fact, it's not. This should be 0, a draw. They're good. Got time for one more? Oh, you will absolutely love this one because I do. Let's flip this board. So we all love knights, don't we? Here we have this position. All these pawns are locked. Everybody can see that. Pawns can't advance anywhere. Let's see, is this a draw? Or is it a win? This is a famous puzzle, actually, which had chess grandmasters fighting with each other. Well, let's see. Well, what can black do? What can white do? So if you could do anything, you would want to pick your knight up and you would work out what the best square you could put him. And probably the best square is probably there, where you can attack the h6 pawn. And if the black king defends it, you've probably got enough time to gobble up one of the other pawns. So ideally, you want to get your knight to there. So is this? Do you reckon this is a win or a draw? Actually, this long sequence of moves, this is a win for white. And the ultimate threat is moving the knight onto that square. but it can't get there directly. Let's have a look why. So let's see what else you can do. I mean, if you do want to get your knight into that position, ultimately there's only one way out, and that one way out is on A4. So you had to find your way to get your knight to A4. Let's just see how that works. Okay, knight bounces across there. Now he swaps back onto a different square. Move the king out of the way. See, we got the king into there, the knight into there. So what's the knight now doing? The knight is now threatening to take that pawn. Obviously, the black king can defend that pretty easily. Black king just comes down to there. White now waits. Black king has to stay close to that pawn. Right, how has this helped us? Okay, knight comes into there, and now the threat is that that knight is going to bounce into that square, and then, I don't know, over to here, over to there. Somehow, but basically getting into this position, if you can ever get to that square there, that's going to be one for white. So black king has got to prevent the knight from getting onto those two squares. So it can only do that by staying on these two squares. Everybody see that? Okay. So white just waits. And now, you will not believe this, the knight comes back. Knight comes back onto a different square. How on earth does the knight come back into this position? Oh, can you see what it's going to do here? How can the white knight? So we just worked out that that white knight cannot force its way into that position because the black king is just going to hold it out. But actually, there's something else that the knight can do here, and that's just give itself up for this pawn here. And what would happen now if black takes the pawn? Black takes the pawn, the knight, king takes, and actually, this is a completely one position for white because there's no way that black can stop the white king from entering the position and gobbling up all the pawns. Yeah? So black cannot take the knight in this position. So what does that allow us to do? That allows us to move the knight back to the other side. Now we move on to the third stage of the plan. The next stage of the plan is to find a way to attack, still the original goal is still to get the knight onto that square. So what's the only other square that it can get to? What's the only other square that it can use to reach our target square? It wants to get there. Well, you can do it from there. Actually, he wants to do it from this square here. And the idea is you want to march your king up to here. Let's just see why this works. I appreciate this is really, really complex, but let's have a look at it. So move our knight into position. Don't do it just yet. Move our king right up into the right position. And now the winning move after 28 moves, knight into there. Why is this now winning? Well, we've already calculated previously that if the white knight ever goes to that square, eventually there's no way that the black king can stop it gobbling up one of these pawns because it just have too much freedom. It will work its way into the position. So black has to take it. And now, this is a completely one position for white because there's nothing black can do to stop the white king entering the position, this time from the other side of the board. And he just gobbles up the pawns, and that's it, game over. So let's just, everybody see that? In that amazing sequence of moves, well, let's just go right back to the starting position. Now, to calculate how you can win this game, you can't just do it by a sequence of random moves and eventually just happen to fall into the right sequence, because it's just far too long. You could be there forever. I mean, as a human, you would like live to, what, 1 million years old before you can calculate all those combinations? So you have to, the way humans think about chess is in terms of patterns or in terms of long-term plans. And the long-term plan here is for that white knight to get onto that square because that's the only winning position. Knowing that if black ever takes the pawn on a3, that will be winning, and if it ever takes the knight on h4, that will be winning, as long as the white queen's in the right position. As a human player, you're thinking in terms of those three plans. You know, where can I move my piece to that's going to make it the most effective, and what happens if you ever were to take that? The computer doesn't think like that. The computer just thinks in the long sequence of moves and calculates the pros and cons of each in terms of its plus or minus pawn score. What does our computer say about this? Obviously, we're even on pawns, same number of pawns. We're a knight up, so it's saying +3. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to play through this sequence of moves, and we can see when the computer eventually catches up with our plan. So I'll just leave that on screen. Say up there. Where do we hide that? So let's go king to b2. So here's our sequence of moves. The computer's still saying, still no real change in the computer score.
Said +13.
It probably. Yeah, +3. +3. Okay, knight comes back. Even now, it doesn't know. Oh, hold on, something's happening. And now it's spotted the plan. Now you can see it's saying, yes, I'm massively winning now, and it's totally right. So it took it until it could calculate like 5-6 moves ahead before it could actually spot that particular sequence of moves. And now it's actually calculating checkmate in 33. Great, I can't calculate checkmate in 33. Can anybody do that? That's totally amazing. Okay, so that's another one where the computer has just actually got it wrong, and it just totally misassessed the position because it's calculating a sequence of moves and it's not doing the pattern recognition, which us humans are much better at doing. And that's the real difference between computer engines and humans. Humans work with pattern recognition, and computers just work by pure brute force, pure calculation. So far, so good. Would anybody like to see another? I will just show you another one because I know you're all gagging for it. Okay, I'm going to just quickly whiz through this one before we go on to the very, very final bit. And this one is a game played between Vasily Ivanchuk and Sergei Karyakin. It's played in 2008. And the reason I'm showing you this is because this is a particular game where as a human, it's really difficult to calculate combinations. The computer gets it almost instantly. So it's almost the opposite of what we were talking about previously. So this is a sequence of moves. Hold on, once we open, my computer's crashing. This is called sorry, that's just crashed on me. We were working it too hard. My poor computer's probably burning out now. Okay. Let's flip the board. We're going to whiz through the opening. This is a well-known sequence of moves in this opening, and it's the open Sicilian, and it's the Sicilian Najdorf, which is signified by this A6 move from black. It's a well-known position, and in fact, grandmasters know these positions like 20, 30 moves deep. In fact, when grandmasters play against each other, they're not starting from nothing. What they would normally do is they would prep their series of openings. They know they're probably going to be facing a certain opponent who plays a certain opening, so they will study up on that. And then rather than just following the same pattern that everybody's played before, they try to find a new move, a novelty in the position, just to try and capture their opponent off guard. So here we go, this sequence of moves. Actually, this is a really aggressive line, actually, where white plays this pinning move on the knight. Black has to unpin, queen comes out. So you can see white's really got all of his pieces out now. White removes the pin on the queen, which is whiz through there. Obviously, the queen's attacked now by the bishop. Oops, sorry, wrong button. Undo, cancel. Don't take that. That'd be bad. That would be a bad move. Don't ever do that. Obviously, that's pinning there. So, that's a counter punch. That's typically you see a lot of this in Grandmaster games. How many people in this position, us humans, would just go, "Oh, my queen's attack. Let's just move it out of the way." But actually, when you get more advanced chess, what you realise is what you don't want to do is just simplify. If you constantly simplify the position, you're removing all of the tactical possibilities from the position. So here, White's going, okay, I'm not just going to move my queen because then it means you'll probably just capture my pawn on e5. So I'm going to capture that first, and I'm going to force you now to take. I mean, Black could take the queen and let his queen swap up, but that'll be much worse for him. So bishop take. Right, now the queen does move out the way. Bishop c5 now, and this is looking really quite dangerous for White because that bishop is now pinned. Sorry, the knight is now pinned by that bishop, which is threatening to do that. The knight's only defended actually by the queen. Undo, only defended by the queen. And Black's intention is just to build up pressure on that knight. Let's see how that works out. So castle queenside to protect the knight. The other knight comes out attacking. Oh, don't give it away. Did anybody see that move? So in this position, that's the lecture over. Sorry. In this position, this is a well-known position actually. This is not the first time it's ever been seen, and it's a long sequence in events as moves as I mentioned earlier. And the normal move here for White would be to do something like bishop take knight, pawn take. That doesn't matter because in an open game you've got double pawns. It really doesn't matter. In actual fact, in the middle game, if you've got double pawns, what it means is you probably opened up your rook because your rook can go to that square and then attack down there. So you've got all your pieces active. Looks beautiful. So, who in this position would ever play a move like the one we've just seen? Or maybe you didn't see it. Let's pretend nobody's seen that move, okay? Nobody's seen it. Nobody's seen it. What you do in this position, Black has got all of his pieces out. They're looking really, really, really dangerous. To be fair, White's got all of his pieces out, but this knight is such a burden on him. But who in the world would see, this is by Vasily Ivanchuk, that in this position, actually, you can play this move here. Queen takes pawn. You're giving up your queen for a pawn, aren't you? Pawn takes back. Now, knight comes into there. So I've got two pawns for my queen. So I'm still massively, massively down on material. But where does the Black king go? Well, the queen. Where does the queen go? So he goes, okay, I'm going to attack. Actually, if you put this through the engine, the queen e5 is probably one of the strongest moves. Yeah, because you're threatening to take that bishop. You're threatening to take that bishop. Probably all sorts of other nasties are happening in there. Well, so what does White do in this position now? He can go check. So he basically winning another was now got 3 pawns. So where does the king go now? Well, obviously the king can't go on that file because it's covered by the rook. It can't go onto that square. Sorry, it can't go onto that square because it's covered by the bishop. So he's got 2 squares it can go to, there or there. If it goes onto, let me move all those. If it goes onto that square, I mean, you've still got this nasty pin. So I mean, the black king, the black king is actually pretty much trapped in the middle of the board there. Everybody see that? He hasn't moved yet. So where did he move to? I mean, it doesn't really matter that much. He moves to that square, and now the knight comes back with another check. Okay, so the black king's got exactly the same problem. Where on earth do I go to? I've only got a couple of squares. I mean, if I go to there, I'm going to be in that terrible pin. Go to that square. I can't go to there. I could go back to there. I wanted, to be honest, it doesn't really matter. There's not a lot black can do here, so you decide eventually that would be the best option to go to this square. So what have we got? Let's look at the position. We've given up our queen. We've got 3 pawns. Now let's continue attacking. The best thing to do in these types of positions when somebody's given up a queen is just to say, okay, you've given up your queen. I'm going to give up my queen for yours. Ha 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 ha. Let's take that one off. So actually, we kind of forced black into this, because what else does black do? I mean, if black can't allow that knight to unveil that check by the bishop, because that's really, because that's really strong, the queen is just going to get chased around all over the place. So he decided in this position the best thing to do is to take the rook. Bear in mind, this was a rapid play game. There are better moves. It's not a bad move that black's played there, but there are better moves. So what do we do first? Well, we don't take with the queen first. We actually unveil that check there. So we gain a move with a check. King has to move. Now we take there. King takes the bishop, and now the knight takes the other bishop. And you end up in this position, actually, where after that amazing queen sacrifice, actually, white is material up, because he's got these extra pawns. And if we run this through the computer now, you see that the assessment is plus 1.5 pawns. And actually, as did we mention earlier, that plus 1 pawn is normally enough for a grandmaster to go on and win. And actually, that's exactly what happened in this game. I'll just show a few more moves to see how it kind of pans out. We'll just whiz through them. I'm always amazed at how grandmasters just see this stuff. It just happens so quickly for them. And what do we do here? And eventually we reach this position where all of the black pawns have gone, and black just resigns in this position, because that's just game over now. Even though he's got the 2 rooks against the rook and the knight, there's just nothing you can do in that position. But let's whiz all the way back to that initial queen take e6 move. A completely astounding move. And what does the computer say? Actually, the computer's not even recognizing that move. And that's why at the time it was so astounding. Is it finding it? Bearing in mind I've only got a little computer that's not particularly powerful. Okay, sorry, before that move. Okay, so the computer is actually finding it. Or it's thinking bishop take f6, queen take e6. What's it favouring? And it's favouring queen. In fact, you're saying bishop take f6 is actually slightly worse. So queen take f6 was the move. But who, as a human player, would ever spot that kind of move? This is where the computer finds it easier, calculating these long lines. I mean, us as mere mortals, I mean, grandmasters have difficulty, us as mere mortals. You never see even a tenth of the combinations possible there. The computer spots all of them instantly, but we would never go, who in this position ever would go queen take f6, and in the confidence of knowing that that's going to end up in a winning position. It's just almost impossible. So that's absolutely a fantastic move by Evenchuk. So far, so good. Very last one, I promise. Very, very last. You'll love this one. This is one of the most famous games of all time, played by Paul Morphy against the Duke of Brunswick, and it ends up in something called the Opera Mate. And the reason for that is that this game actually was played during an opera. Apparently, the story goes that Paul Morphy, this was in early 1800s, and Paul Morphy became a legend of the early chess game because of his tactical play and the way he could just checkmate any opponent. So he was playing in an opera house while an opera was being played against 2 people, and apparently they were making so much noise that the players in the opera actually had to stop and find out what the hell was happening up in the booth. So this is Paul Morphy playing as white. Standard opening. This is the Philidor defense. Black immediately goes a little bit wrong. I mean, black's bearing in mind that Paul Morphy, playing in the early 1800s, is not playing against the world's best players. There were no such thing as world's best players back then, or very few, because the game was still fairly new. but you can only beat what's in front of you. Okay. So, and in actual fact, Paul Morphy takes a few liberties. He doesn't play always the best moves. He plays what he thinks is the most interesting moves because it leads to nice combinations and stuff. So they might be slightly inaccurate. But why is black gone a little bit wrong here? Well, actually, it's a little bit wrong because white can just win a pawn. He can go pawn take. That pawn has to take. Queen takes. King takes, and now he can win that pawn there. Okay, but Paul Morphy doesn't want to do that. That's just, well, in fact, he does want to do that. He kind of forces the bishop to be taken first. What black should do here actually is just play something simple like knight d7, because that protects that threat now. Protects that threat of pawn take. So we go back to the start, shall we? Bishop g4, bishop g4, d takes e5, bishop take e3, okay? Because you can't allow that queen to be taken. Queen take f3, pawn take. So in this position, bishop c4. Now he's threatening checkmate on f7, because you've got that bishop, that queen, threatening that square. That will be checkmate if the queen takes it. Clear? So what do you do? Knight f6, out to protect it. Queen comes across there. Now he's threatening to take that pawn again. Queen comes out to defend. Knight comes out. c6. And why c6? Because obviously what he doesn't want to do is have that knight bounce onto that square, because that would just be really, really quite horrid. So he plays c6 to stop that. Bishop comes out to pin, and it's absolutely beautiful the way the pieces coordinate. It's very, very simple. He's not doing anything special, but what he's not doing is he's not just swapping off the pieces at the first opportunity. He's building up the pressure. So he's got all of his pieces out into play. Oh, what does black do in this position? It was really, really difficult because obviously the queen is threatening to come into there at some point and take this pawn. I mean, for instance, say if the knight had moved here, now he can take the pawn and the rook's threatened. There's not many things that black can do in this position, and actually the computer thinks that b5 is probably the best move for black. But it leads to this sequence of moves. Can you see what happens now? No? Okay. Knight take b5, so I'll give up my knight for the 2 pawns, leading to a check. And now knight comes out to defend the check. So how can you build up pressure now on the position? Very simple. Triple castle. Okay. So that knight is now attacked by that bishop, by that rook. The knight can't move anywhere because it's pinned against the king. It's only defended, well, it's defended by the king, the queen, and now it's going to be defended by the rook as well. Okay, so it's defended. So how does white continue the attack from this position? Well, let's have a look. I've got this bishop is doing a pretty good job, actually. The queen is looking deadly dangerous. That bishop's doing fantastic. That rook's attacking up there. I want to find a way to get this rook into the game. Anybody see the move? What would you do in here? Actually, this is one of the patterns that you can spot when you got a really strong pin like this. You want to try and hold the pin for as long as possible. So the wrong move to play here would actually be bishop take knight. So instead, what you do is you rook take knight. Now, obviously, black's got to recapture, and now you still maintain this really deadly pin. And what does that do? That enables us to bring the other rook back into play. You see how it's so simple? It just kind of flows. You almost don't have to think about it. But how has he got into this position where the moves just flow? It's totally... And black actually hasn't played particularly bad other than the few moves in the opening. So what happens next? How do you continue in this position? You've gone rook to d1, and the threats here are absolutely hugely significant. So this rook has got to be defended. that rook has got to be defended. It wants to be defended ideally by the knight. So let's just move the queen out of the way, and then the knight can move to defend. Yeah, so now I've got 1, 2, 3 pieces defending that rook. Okay. Oop, cancel. Don't delete it. So let's move the queen there. Now, can anybody see? There's a couple of ways to win here, but there's actually a brilliant way to win. Leads to checkmate. Anybody spot it? It's a move with check. Bishop take rook, check. What do you do? Okay, knight comes back. Obviously, you don't want to capture with the queen because the rook will just take it. Now, what's the move for white? It's checkmate in 2. And then we can go for a pint of beer. Rook takes knight is not the winning move. That is the losing move. Because after rook takes knight, you can just take queen, or even king take. It doesn't really matter. And now you've run out of material. Can anybody spot the winning move here? Who said that? Can anybody let's queen to b8? Can anybody see why that works? Oh, it's beautiful. It leads to what's now known as the opera mate. And after, in this position, what can the king do? Well, the king can't move here because it's covered by the bishop. Yes, obviously he can't stay on the back rank because it's covered by the queen. There's no way to put a piece in between, so he has to take with the knight. Yes. Now, can anybody see the checkmating 1? Rook goes up to there. Ta-da! Checkmate. And this game is so beautiful because black could have played much better, to be fair, but from a certain point forward, once that bishop had that pin on the king that was stuck in the middle, it's all false. It's all false moves. And we'll look at the other pieces of black. That rook hasn't moved. That bishop hasn't moved. The king hasn't moved. White is left with only 2 pieces on the board, that piece, and they deliver checkmate. How beautiful is that? And that is why I love chess, because of that. And that concludes the lecture on chess. I hope you enjoyed. And thank you, everybody.